All right, here we are. And welcome, Julianna Raye of the Unified Mindfulness organization. Thanks for being here.
Thanks. Thanks, Scott. It's great to be here. I just realized I don't have my name on here. Here we go.
Oh,
Oops.
there you
Complete.
go. All right. So I guess I'll just give a little background and then we can dive in. Of that, you did your first dark retreat here with us, was it 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah, I guess it was a couple years ago.
And you went in for 10 days?
Yeah, that was my first time.
And then that set you off. You've done many dark retreats since then, and then you were back here last month to for another dive in the dark. But you've done more dark retreats since then.
Yeah, I did three 5-day retreats and then I came back for a 7-day.
And so I'm sure the first question most people have is like, why so much time in the dark? Like, what is it that you love about it?
Yeah, I find it to be a poultice. Uh, and by that I mean that from my perspective, the work that we do, whether you want to call it spiritual work or whether you just want to call it showing up better, more completely as human beings, having a more fulfilling life, reducing our suffering, that all comes back to removing what interferes with that, with the fullness of our experience. And the dark creates this ultra simplified uh, setting where your sensory system is relieved of the burden of processing all of the information that it's uh, processing out of habit. And that can be deeply unsettling uh, because it's totally disorienting. But on the flip side of that, the simplicity of it makes it easier uh, to tap into the what I would call a free-flowing sensory system because there's so much less to process. And as a result of that, then it draws up whatever blockages need to surface in order to um, reduce our suffering and experience fulfillment.
Hmm. And something you and I have talked a lot about is kind of what happens before you get to the flip side. I mean, if I'm listening, I want to know how do you get to the flip side, but I think first is that tends to be part of the problem, if you will, of like just trying to get to the flip side. And we've talked a lot about, I forget the words you've used, but it was more like the threat response that happens when someone goes into the dark that you said is really difficult. And in your experience and what you know about that from your experiences, what could you share about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's like an ontological shock element of being in the dark, and that we're just thrust into a situation where our normal coping strategies aren't going to work in this setting. We can't get busy distracting ourselves with X, Y, or Z. And we don't really know when we've done that habitually as a way to manage feelings that, may be difficult or memories that may be difficult. We don't really know what's going to emerge. And I think um, the the fact is that when you take that away, stuff does come up. And for me, that's a good thing because I trust the resources that I have to work with it. But if you don't have the resources, uh, I think that can be really challenging. Or sometimes you discover that you have the resources you didn't realize you have. So that can be really deeply enlivening and reassuring. So I don't know if I just answered your question. Tell
Yeah,
me
I have a
again.
couple,
Yeah.
I have a couple questions from that is, I'll say them now so I don't forget them later, but one is like unpacking those resources, that orientation that is, in a sense, necessary for being with it. But before that, like there's things that we've talked about of like why is the dark so threatening to our nervous system? Like what's actually happening? How does that threat tend to present itself? Like to really unpack all of that so someone can understand. A lot of people imagine, I mean, especially people who are interested in going in the dark, that it's going to be really comforting and it's going to be quiet and I'm going to love it. But that tends to not be what happens for almost everyone, at least initially. And then what happens
Yeah.
after that's different, but it depends on how people respond and react to what's actually happening in their nervous system and if they have the capacity to first be honest with what's happening and then the resources. But if you would unpack first, like in your experience and what you notice of why is that happening and how does it tend to show up and things around that.
Yeah. So there's this one core ability that I would point to. Um, there's this term equanimity, which is used in a lot of different ways historically. The unified mindfulness approach tends to talk about it as a skill that you can develop. That's not the only way to understand it, but it's a helpful way because it allows you to feel like you have a capacity to influence your experience in ways that make it, either more manageable or more fulfilling. So, equanimity, we say that's the ability to allow your experience to come and go freely. So, that comes down to, okay, so fear is coming up. Am I able to have a relationship to this experience of fear where I'm willing for it to come, bubble up, get as intense as it gets, fade away? Can I ride out the rhythm of a wave of fear, for instance? And uh, you could say that about any sensory experience or bundle of sensory experiences because they tend to be bundled together. So what's going to cause that fear to well up? It's probably going to be a memory. And what's the memory composed of? It's composed of difficult emotions and visual images, and maybe you're hearing some kind of um, someone say something or some thought in your head. And it's the combination of those happening together that give the impression this is really compelling. And so I think the ability to have equanimity, and which comes down to a relationship where you're able to allow your experience to happen freely, um, and the fact that it's across the whole sensorium is hard. It's hard for people to wrap their heads around the fact that um, these ingredients, these bits of sensory information are combining and creating this impression of a solid separate reality. And so the antidote is, can you kind of untangle those strands? Can you even just be with part of that experience, like the wave of fear or what have you? So if you understand this core ability of sensory clarity, and it's supported by these two other abilities, concentration and, I'm sorry, the equanimity, these two other abilities of sensory clarity and concentration support equanimity.
Hmm.
So, yeah, did I switch to sensory clarity? I can't remember if I did. I just say equanimity or sensory clarity?
You said both.
Okay, yeah, all right. So basically, equanimity is the core ability. And
Hmm.
sometimes when you're plunged into a shocking situation, you automatically default, your body knows what to do. It goes right into your body mind, goes right into that state of equanimity, that openness.
Hmm.
Um, but but a lot of times it doesn't. It freaks out. And so how do you recover that equanimity,
Hmm.
that willingness for experience to be just as it is? You can use these other tools of concentration and sensory clarity. And that's the process of meditating, is basically teaching you how to tend to default to equanimity with your experience over time,
Uh-huh.
more over time. Yeah.
Which I think is different than the traditional way that at least Westerners take in meditation is more of like a mind over matter, like controlling the mind, concentrating in a way that like quiets the mind, or breathing in ways that moves energy, that moves stuff because it's uncomfortable. Like there's more of a strategy and an agenda. And I love one of Adyashanti's quotes of something like, meditation is not about mastering a technique, it's about letting go of control, which would be more kind
Yeah,
of what you're pointing to, if it's more relational than like this moving towards some ideal of not being in fear. That's not the kind of the undercurrent of that movement. It's actually relating to fear.
100%. And I think one of the traps with meditation is that if it's technique forward, in other words, it's all about this technique, and you do this technique, like whether it's body sweeping or whether it's breath focus or what have you, um, that doesn't necessarily meet the individual in their experience. Where if you just flip the script and say, actually, it's about this skill development of this ability to allow your experience to come and go freely, well, now the whole world is opened up to you. And it's not just about a technique, it's about what's underlying that. And I think that gets lost sometimes when people adhere to a technique diligently and they get rewards from it, so they feel confident that the technique is giving them what they need, but they don't necessarily understand the underlying mechanism. And if you're not empowered with that, if you don't understand that the reason you're getting rewards, so let's say your breath focus is your thing and you find yourself dropping into deep, peaceful states. If you don't understand the role that equanimity is playing in that, then you don't see the broader principle at play, and you don't see its application across your whole sensory system. It just seems like something that was brought on by this particular breath track, and that this technique is the way into that. And so it can be limiting, and it can cause you to have ideas that are misguided just based on your experience. In other words, oh, it's all about the breath focus. That's the whole thing. And
Uh-huh.
if you then, yeah, so you get kind of your understanding is narrow, and so you make you have miss you you don't you misperceive what's really at play, and
Uh-huh.
then you're not empowered to apply it in a range of settings.
Right, you already kind of have you've got a strategy, you've got a map. It's not responsive, it's not
It's
relational,
not
right?
responsive, it's not relational, it's not adaptive. That's right, exactly.
It's got an agenda and it's got an ideal, and this doesn't match it, so we're going to do this to change that. And that obviously doesn't work in the dark because your circumstance, your situation remains eternal. You're in the dark, there's nothing that's going to change, and then you may be in your strategies. And you may even, through those strategies, create at times an enjoyable experience. But the moment you stop your strategy, you're kind of back to this fundamental thing you're avoiding. And this last time we were driving in, one of the ways that you were describing, like why is the darkness so threatening? You were talking a bit about the visual field and how we rely on that for a sense of safety. If you could you share more on that? Like, I think some people imagine, oh, the darkness is going to be scary. I'll be alone. It's a long time. I'll be with my thoughts. But I don't think they really think of, like, from a nervous system, animal level, that the darkness is actually threatening for any animal. I mean, maybe not animals that function in the dark, but any human, that it is going to be fundamentally threatening. Why? Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, this is just a hunch, but to me, it makes sense that sighted people, we orient primarily through visual experience. And part of how what we tend to center as human beings at this point in evolution is Separate equals safety. That's sort of like the basic relational stance that we center. If I'm
Mm.
separate, I'm safe. In other words, and it goes way back to, the tiger's not going to eat me. If I'm separate, I'm safe. So what's the best way to orient ourselves physically so that we have an impression of I'm over here and that's over there, right? I'm over here and that car that could potentially hit me is over there. There's a good reason to be able to have a sense of I'm separate and to know, oh, I'm physically distant and it's this far away and it's going this fast. But it's all visual. We look to cross the street and we measure how far is it? Is it safe to cross, etc. So that habit of relying on our visual experience to keep us physically safe, I think it's just profound how much we rely on that. And so then we go into this setting where we can't rely on it at all. It removes this huge chunk that we have tended to allocate towards a particular mechanism that keeps us safe, supposedly. Suddenly, that's just gone. And I think that is deeply startling.
Hmm. And then I think in that, that is why we find that the majority of people initially when they're in the dark have their eyes closed, and many of them really tight. Like they'll notice with some support and some inquiry from someone else supporting them that like they're actually squeezing their eyes tight and their eyes are
Mm,
closed because then they're not in contact with this thing that feels threatening. They're somehow inside insulated in what it
mm,
is. And so, it really creates this beautiful exploration of where does real safety come from? Like we feel safe in the world because we can see right now, somebody can look around their settings and know that they're safe right here, right now. That doesn't mean that they're going to actually feel safe in their body, but like
mhm,
there is this kind of at least mental knowing that I'm safe. And to backpedal for a moment, like some people who maybe don't have much contact with their body are in some kind of strategy. If I ask them while they're in the dark, are you safe? And it's like, yes, I'm safe. And it's like, well, how do you know you're safe? What's happening in your body? And sometimes there's not that bridge because it's more of this mental kind of mind over matter. And so this
mm,
inquiry of if safety doesn't really come from the mind and it's not coming
mm,
from our visual field affirming our safety, like where does real safety come from?
mm.
And
Yes.
so, how does, in your experience, like when you land in a real sense of safety in the dark, and it's not coming from your visual field, and it's not coming from this sense of telling yourself you're safe or mentally accepting a notion that you're safe, where does real safety emerge from?
Well, what I would say is the only way human beings can know anything is through our sensorium, through our senses. So there is going to be some kind of signal on a sensory level. And the paradox is that it's the reduction of impediments in the sensory system, it's the equanimity. So, on one level, we can say equanimity is this relationship to experience, this ability to allow experience to come and go freely. But on another level, we can say that equanimity, um, you can cross a certain threshold where it is the free flowing sensory system itself. It is sensory. We refer to it sometimes as sensory conductivity. In other words, the frictionless sensory experience, the frictionless sensory state. And we could say that the friction is all the ways that there's gripping and holding and that interferes with our free experience. So the way my own experience is, the more equanimity, the safer. It's
Mm,
the
So
It's
it's not
the
based on your
friction in the
experience.
system.
Safety is
Well,
then
it's
in that instance, it's not based on what's actually happening to you or around you.
it's based on the absence of friction in the sensory system. It's based on
Uh-huh.
if there's less uh, friction, if there's less gripping. So, for instance, if I'm not safe, I'll feel, and this comes up in the dark. I mean, just to be clear, I'm there to work through my stuff the way everybody else is. So when I'm in the dark and wake up in the night after a weird dream or what have you, or I hear a sound or something, it's very clear there's a gripping in the solar plexus area. Well, what is that gripping? That's like an energy allocation. That's the alarm system, the monitoring system of my brain saying, "Oh, something's not right. Uh-oh." And it's manifesting as this gripping sensation in my solar plexus that says something is wrong. So then what's the opposite of something is wrong? Well, one way to understand the opposite of that is not there. There's no friction in that area. It's free flowing. And when the sensory system is free flowing, then that can give rise to joy, uh, gratitude, relief. So it's the release from the grip of whatever is sticky in your sensory system.
Hmm.
That's a way to understand equanimity.
Yeah. And then what if like around, I mean, from my experience and witnessing at times, like that capacity or the level of awareness where one could have gripping in their solar plexus, some tension and tightness in the chest, and through moving into a relational field, that they could be relaxed as awareness and be in relation with the gripping. That like the possibility of like having an uncomfortable pressure filled experience and still finding somewhere in your system, be it some other part of your body, like where the solar plexus could be gripping, but like the legs feel relaxed, or they just feel neutral, or there's something a little bit more subtle, like even just awareness itself that is relaxed and soft. And so, in the face of pressure, in the face of the nervous system being like, I'm under threat, there may also be something that is like stable or secure to relax into.
Yes. So what you're describing there is an excellent equanimity strategy. If the aim is to allow experience to come and go freely, then to discover, oh, well, there's this gripping in my solar plexus, but actually my legs are calm. You're reallocating energy toward an area that is more frictionless. And in doing that, you're inducing equanimity with the area that is more gripped. So the one thing we get to do is we get to redistribute our attention, right? It's concentration power. That's that skill. If I
Mm-hmm.
can concentrate on this other area, then I teach my brain, hey, you don't need to give so much importance to this localized gripping in the solar plexus. And by redistributing the weight, soften, release the grip. So we're teaching ourselves to have a new relationship with our sensory experience where you can trust all of it. But what'll happen is um, commonly, because our minds are so wired for the alarm system is just so vigilant, right? It's like, uh-oh, feel it in the solar plexus, and then it creates these thoughts, and the thoughts are like, there's something wrong. What if there's a bear up there and it's going to fall through the roof? Or, what crazy thought you have? There's a snake in the toilet, whatever comes up in the dark. And, then you get another jolt in the solar plexus, and then that reinforces the thinking. And then you're caught in a loop that is a self-feeding loop. Whereas if you are able to redistribute your weight, reposition your attention toward an area, like you said, that is a more neutral area and discover, hey, look, it's, that's going on over here. but look what's going on over there. It's calm. It's okay. Then you're teaching the mind to not grip so tight, to not get caught in that alarm loop.
Mm. And I think that's one of the unique things that I think Dark Retreat offers when it's held within a container that supports that is like you feel under threat at times and there's a pressure, but like there's no real threat. And you have a lot of time and space to really be with that. It's kind of unique where in the world when we feel under threat, there may be an actual action that we need to take because there is threat, or it's not really a safe environment, or we're not provided with the permission to actually admit it because of the vulnerability that would bring, and being vulnerable in the world makes us, I mean, vulnerable to whatever may happen. And so there's not really the space and the slowness and the permission to really, what is it like to feel threatened and at least mentally know you're not under threat so that you can actually slow down, admit that you feel threatened, and just really get to one of the terms that we use here with people a lot is asking them, what would nurture do? As a movement towards, like, instead of the fixing, kind of healing, transforming, rearranging it, managing it, what is it like to meet it with nurture? What would happen if you let nurture lead?
Exactly. Yes, which is why I love the setting because it is a perfect place to work through um, fear fundamentally. And the nurture, what would nurture do is yet another way, again, to induce equanimity. Does what happens when we have a nurturing attitude towards or a nurturing relationship with whatever is it can only manifest as some kind of sensory signal, right? It's the gripping in the solar plexus, or it's the crazy thoughts in the head. And so how might I meet this in a nurturing way is another way to say, how might I allow this to be as it is so that it can come and go freely, so that I stop being caught in it.
Mm-hmm. One of the other things that you said a little back was just that sense of safety that we have from boundaries and knowing and being in separation. And something that more recently that I've been able to experience somatically is how, as a reflex, my system, my structure uses, and I mean, this, I think this is just kind of a reflex for most humans, but how I've now experienced it in me is how my system uses judgment to push away a certain person or a situation that feels threatening. And so, whereas before, I used to maybe back up my judgments with a lot more, I'd have a good story behind it, and there would be a lot of righteousness, and I would be really right in my judgment. But now I know, like, immediately when I'm noticing a judgment or kind of a repulsion or disgust, like, that I'm feeling threatened, that there's some disgust and repulsion, and then there's a judgment that helps insulate me from the threat. And it's just like, and then I can notice if I let that in, be it a person or a circumstance or just how someone's being, the how it actually puts me in a direct relationship with that sense of threat in my body and how it is um, yeah, just a different way of orienting in that.
Completely, it's so pernicious. We don't realize how, and when we talk about separate is safe, sounds kind of abstract, but then the reality of it is exactly what you're describing. The reality of it is, oh my God, I would never have said that, or what are they thinking? Or, uh, what's wrong with that person, or what have you, with all the ways that uh, we uh, have belief structures that keep us separate. as well. It's not just about physical separateness. It's about these belief structures that keep that distance in place. Like you said, and you can experience, oh yeah, there's an energetic distance between me and this other person that I'm creating through this. And by the way, what does this judgment actually do? It torments you. It causes you suffering. You're the one who is suffering as a result of the judgment. You're the one who feels alienated as a result of the judgment. So, what are we doing to ourselves by keeping
Hmm.
ourselves safe in that
Yeah.
way?
It's hard to sense that though. Like, I think like when I like there's a hardening, obviously, that happens when there's a judgment that protects us from that perceived threat. And it's almost like I think for some, like almost given the choice, they'd choose that hardening over actually letting that thing in because I mean, I know in my how it would typically register in my system is it would feel like a weakness, like it's an exposure of vulnerability. And I would rather my system, not me, but like my nervous system would rather feel strong, tough, capable, powerful. That those would just be my go-to strategies. Some people make themselves smaller and try to be invisible, but like and so my system would rather choose judgment and hardening over letting something in that feels threatening because of the vulnerability and the weakness, the perceived weakness. And I think that becomes such a an amazing exploration in the dark as there almost there has to be like a willingness to be weak and not at like a depth level weak, but like on a persona level, at a self level, a weakness so that there is permeability to actually like have access underneath the armor, which is not a true strength, although it feels like a strength.
Yes, I would say that's conditioning. That's the habit of this is how this body mind defaults to making itself safe. The judgment is part of this routine of keeping yourself safe and understanding, centering this whole structure, this belief structure of safety equals separateness. And so the default wants to keep bringing you back to the default. Why? Because it's how you survived until now. It knows this, this, um, this kind of way of defaulting to this alarms, like a secure position of if I'm separate, I'm safe. Well, you've survived until now, and what matters most is your survival. So that's why it's preferable because there's a
Hmm.
guarantee, it seems, of your survival if you just keep doing what you've been doing. And what you've been doing is keeping yourself separate to stay safe. And so the vulnerability comes with the unknown, with the uncertainty of, well, if I change this belief structure, I could die. This
Hmm.
could set me up for death. I don't know what's going to happen.
So, what does someone, in your experience, what is the orientation? Like, there's not much benefit for someone's sense of self. Like going through this passage, and I think that's where it gets confusing. Like for some, like I came here to feel elevated or have a really profound experience or feel better about myself. And like going through this passage doesn't necessarily make your sense of self greater. It's like it really feeds something that precedes the sense of self. And so what is the orientation that really has somebody, one, kind of like wanting this, and two, really leaning into it in the face of kind of relinquishing an important or a kind of solid sense of self because it's so exposing and vulnerable.
Yeah. Well, I think simultaneous to this kind of habit of centering this separate is safe framing,
Mm.
we also, all of us know uh, what it's like in the moments where we feel most deeply connected. Uh, whether it's looking at a sunset or hugging a child or, playing with your pet or what have you, um, we know what it is for the boundaries to dissolve into connectivity. And we tend to attribute that connectivity to this person, that pet, that beautiful sunset. We tend to externalize the connectivity. But uh, when this principle of equanimity says, well, actually, the connectivity is about the dropping away of whatever is interfering with connectivity. Connectivity is the given
Mm.
underneath it all and within it all.
That's
And
what we're really
so
after.
that's
Is that
right.
what's your point? Yeah. Huh.
That's that's it. And so in that setting, there, if you can, um, and it's not always possible for people. I understand it's quite a risk, and maybe in a way it's just too far removed from their lived experience. But there's the potential that you can contact the simplicity, and experience the simplicity of that setting as soothing, as um, you know, uh, inducing equanimity, so that the times when the fear comes up and that grips you, you're able to ride that out, and it resolves into this deepening a sense of peace, this deepening sense of connectivity. That is what everybody really wants. Yeah.
Mm.
So
Uh-huh.
there's that chance. Yeah.
So there's almost this honesty of what really matters most, and then you're faced with at those times of what's more important, the connectivity or not having gripping in your belly. And you kind of like, when you really get pressed, which I think the darkness is an amazing container for, where you're under certain kind of pressure, and then there's that choice, maybe more at an awareness level, of what matters most, having your ideal experience or being in connection with what's actually here. And I think that's where it's an interesting kind of orientation. As I think for a lot of us, I know certainly for myself, when I first got into spirituality, and then for the next 20 years within it, up until a few years ago, my whole movement in it was moving towards my ideal. It was not rooted in truth or connectivity. I mean, I wouldn't have said that at the time or seen that at
Mm.
the time, but it was more about having certain techniques or practices to create this romanticized or idealized experience. I mean, and those
Mm.
threads still move through me, tend to be more subtle and sometimes unseen, and then something happens and I'll uncover another kind of membrane of like, oh wow, I was actually doing that to relieve this so I could create my ideal. But then you're forever in that loop because obviously things are always going wrong. And then as opposed to kind of what remains underneath that and connecting from that space.
Yes, I think there are real traps along the way. It's a long road for all of us. You mentioned one of the traps being this kind of need to, uh, in essence, avoid the difficult stuff, right? Keep your distance from it. And the other being this, I think what you're describing as this preoccupation with becoming the version of yourself that you think you're supposed to be. Is that it?
Sure. Yeah. Supposed to be or
Yeah.
was told to be, or that's what you see. You've like romanticized in enlightened masters or spiritual teachers or role models, and like just that very small bandwidth that like that's how I'm supposed to be all of the time. I'm not supposed to be sad or scared or ashamed or anxious. And I have all these tools to work that out when that happens so I can be this ideal version.
Right. Yes. Uh, Not taking into account context, for instance, that when you're reading what that master is saying, they were saying at a moment and saying that at a moment in time, they were talking to a particular audience. Maybe they were speaking in response to uh, the opposite misguided, trying to course correct, an opposite misguided perception. So it's very easy to get trapped in our ideas of what they were saying and what that, means for us right now in the moment. And that's right. If we don't have this adaptability, this ability to work with this as it's unfolding, our experience as it's unfolding, then we can get caught in those mental traps, even with the best of intention, really looking to improve ourselves. So yes, the the trick is that, or the challenge is that authenticity, true authenticity, yeah, leaves no room for it really demands um, that the paradigm shift away from I'm in control to I am at the service of, uh, and whatever you want to call what is not the limited self. The limited self is at the service of whatever you want to call not the limited self. So the
Hmm.
limited self is representation of and is at the service of uh,
Hmm.
the big self.
Yeah. And when we first started talking, you kind of there was those two different pieces of what happens when you go in the dark. There was the confronting the threat, and then the flip side, once someone actually genuinely has a genuine felt sense of safety, or they are in more of a settled relationship with fear, and in that connectivity, there is safety. And even if there is a sense of fear in that connection, there can be a sense of nurture, which both can then exist. And so, in your experience, when you've either established and really settled into a felt sense of safety, or just at least have that connectivity and that sense of nurture with what's here, from then, what's been your experience of what is available for you in the dark?
Yes. Um, well, the ability to commune with the divine is a way to describe it. Um, the ultimate absence of boundary. So if you think about equanimity again as on a continuum, it's on the one hand, we can say, okay, when you're caught in the grip of judgment or caught in the grip of pain, or there's this sense, I'm trapped in this body, then that's a very solidified, solid, and separate impression. And we can say there's not much equanimity going on. But then let's say you have a relationship with neutral experience where you're okay, not much is going on, and you're kind of like okay. So there's maybe this base level of equanimity because your experience is restful. But now let's say you've got this grip because you're frightened, but you're also able to have equanimity with that. You're also able to let that be there as part of the whole unfolding of experience. Well, that's another level deep of equanimity. And now let's say there is the full arising of sensory, the whole um, field of sensory information is arising and passing, and there's no friction. Well, that's another level deep of equanimity. And it's all about a spectrum of equanimity. And we when we talk about the non-dual, uh, that side of the spectrum is just basically equanimity that has crossed a threshold. So the whole sensorium is foregrounding the non-separateness instead of foregrounding the separateness. And that is across the whole sensorium. And that's one way to understand non-dual experience. And when you're in a
Could you
setting
say that
where,
last, could you say that last part again with the background and the foreground? Yeah, in a
yeah,
different way.
yes. So um, there tend to be two common ways that this sensorium, a sensorium, knows non-dual experience. One is that it all goes away. Everything goes away. There is no, it's utter nothingness. No sense of self and world. Nothing. And
But
then
something
another way
remains,
to, hmm?
right? But
But
there is
but
something then.
something comes online at some point and says, "Oh, nothingness." Yes,
Uh-huh.
but so the when the self goes away, the world goes away. In that moment, it's all offline. But
Mhm.
when either in the going away or in the returning, then a little bit of sensory something comes back online or is about to go offline and says, "Oh, nothingness." Yeah.
Mhm.
So but then another way to know non-duality is there's something that could be anything from a white light to full, I'm bopping around in the world, at a pizza restaurant with my friend. But what is foregrounded is that there's no boundary between anything. And what is backgrounded is there's still this sense, okay, there's a body interacting with another body in this setting called a pizza restaurant, and that's all going on. But that's not what's uh, being perceived in this sensorium. What's being perceived in this sensorium is uh, that the the impression of separateness between this, that, and the other thing has gone away. And what's foregrounded is non-separateness.
Mm.
The the continuity of the field is maybe a way to say it. So the sensory system is knowing the continuity of the field of experience as primary, as what matters most, and the what's being backgrounded is the distinctions, which are still there. So you can be in an active setting. It's just about what's being centered by the sensory
Mm.
system. So the threat response is not being centered in that case.
Right.
Yeah.
So you could have that gripping and still be kind of oriented or referencing in the foreground that way of being or what you're like, because that could also be in the background.
Yes. Yes, you could. Mm, at least in my experience, the there's maybe ordinary gripping. Yes, there. Yes, I mean, for instance, I can recall having an argument with someone while experiencing non-separateness. So there was still this activation of blah 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 blah, blah, blah. But there's not. It's not. It isn't gripping the way it is when there's a lack of equanimity. When there's a lack of equanimity, um, it's creating a lot of friction. But when there's high equanimity, there's an effortlessness about it. Even the
And, s-
manifestation of that. Yeah.
and so in that, that's what I was going to ask, where you pointed to the effortlessness of like, this isn't an equanimity that somebody's doing something to achieve an equanimity. It's more in this effortless relating and connection, right? Like when you refer to the equanimity, it's like a manifestation of effortlessly relating and connecting to what's most directly here.
Yeah, a way to think about it is we do the relational practice of developing equanimity. So purposely, for instance, going to the leg like you were describing, where it's there's not that friction to offset the area where there is the friction, so that the area where there is the friction can kind of release, take care of itself. So that's a purposeful relating that induces equanimity, induces a freer flow of energy through the sensory system. But what happens is either over time or naturally, some people naturally have this gift of equanimity. There's a property uh, of like sensory conductivity is our word for it. But basically, there's a sensory property of unimpeded, like low impedance sensory processing, basically.
Mhm.
And that's uh, that increases over time for masters, for meditation masters, for instance. You could say that one way in which they've achieved mastery is that their sensory system became really low impedance, a
Mhm.
really high baseline trait level equanimity is one way to
Mhm.
put it.
Right. But it's not, like you said, it's not through this active doing, it's through this kind of
That's right.
receptive relating.
It's the way it is. It's
Aha.
just how it is. Yeah.
Aha. Ultimately just being natural. I mean, that's one thing that was striking for me over the years of hundreds, over 600 people coming through here was people who came who had no meditation history, no meditation experience, but had receptivity, had humility, had some, for whatever reason, had a capacity to be with how it really was, how it really is. And it really just showed me like how natural that state really is. It's all the adding, and how, for me, in the complexity of how spirituality got organized in my system, that it became more of an adding than a subtracting. I got really sophisticated strategies for managing what is, as opposed to more of a capacity to just be with what is.
Mm.
Um, that's changed over the last few years, but witnessing people go through and seeing that, like you said, it's just how it is, that there's this naturalness to almost even the awakened state, although it's not very intuitive from like a human like self-preservation perspective.
Well, that's it. From the perspective of this contract, this social contract we've all made around how to be in the world and how to stay safe, no, it's not intuitive.
Right. Yeah. Beautiful. And so, how do people find you and the work that you do, and anything that you would want to share with people about it who would be interested to know what you do and where to find you?
Ah, well, you can go to unifiedmindfulness.com and /core. We have a free video series. We have a free book on Amazon about our core training, Unified Mindfulness Core. So we have a lot of free resources for people to learn about the method, and that's probably the easiest way you can start, see if it's a fit for you. And we have a really vibrant community, and we hope you'll join us.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Juliana, for taking the time to chat today.
Thanks so much, Scott.
Yeah.